Welcome to Digital India Summit, a premier initiative by Times Network which peeps into the digital future of India. And I think today is the most exciting episode of this entire series because we are going to discuss this year, 2022, how this year is going to be a revolutionary year for meta and blockchain technology. And I have two very eminent speakers with me who are sort of an authority on this subject. I have Kavita Gupta with me, co-founder and CSO of FinTech TV, and we have with us Yatsiu, co-founder and executive chairman of Animoca Brands. Today, what we are going to discuss is how the technology is going to evolve and how it is going to shape the future of humankind. So let me start with a very basic question because, and Kavita, maybe I can start with you because you have been working closely with, a huge Indian digital team. But there is still a lot when it comes to cryptos or NFTs. So if you can break it down and simplify it for our viewers, that what exactly is crypto and NFTs and what role does blockchain play in this entire ecosystem?
So blockchain is your decentralized database technology, right? So the main thing is blockchain. I think everything else comes after that. Think of blockchain as a car. If you don't have it, or maybe I should say, think of blockchain as your road. If you don't have it, you don't have the mean to go. And then comes the crypto, which is a sort of like a gas fee, which is a currency payable over blockchain. And of course, crypto is a very broad term, which can be for some crypto like Ether is used to pay to use any services on Ethereum network. Same, you have Solana, and then you have a lot of tokens which people pile up in crypto. And then you have NFTs, which is your non-fungible tokens, which is the whole idea of that there cannot be two assets which are completely similar, have their own asset class. To buy and sell NFT, you need crypto, and to store those NFT, you need blockchain. So I think it's the technology, it's the currency, and then you have NFT, which is equivalent to your art pieces in digital.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. That's nicely, I think, explained. Yet my next question is for you. There is almost a very solid digital divide that the world is dealing with. So there is one part of the world which is right up there and maybe evolving very rapidly and quickly as far as the whole blockchain technology is concerned, or maybe cryptos and NFTs and even metaverse. And then there is that other half which is still grappling with the fundamentals or basics of blockchain technology. So how is this going to evolve? Because at some point, if it has to impact entire humankind, then the spread of technology also has to be that rapid. So how will this evolve going forward?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is to make sure that as many people join this movement as quickly as possible, so that they can all partake in this in as equitable, sort of an equally fashion as possible. Right. One of the challenges with any kind of divide is that those who have access earlier tend to get an advantage over the ones who come in later. But there's one big parallel that is different this time when it comes to blockchain technology and really the data ownership paradigm, which is that ultimately what blockchain enables us to do is that we now have sovereignty over our data. And sovereignty over data actually means that we have now control in the sense that it could be used and should be treated like a property right. So we think of data in two ways. One, it should be a property right, like owning a house, right, or owning your land is property. And it should also be a human right, meaning that we are fully entitled to it in the same sense that we have rights elsewhere. The problem right now is that data is not treated in any of those matters. So it exists as a terms of service that is now, used in places like Facebook or Amazon, and these centralized data structure, data sort of places that centralize our data and use it, basically have become little kingdoms, or actually very large kingdoms to be more precise. And they farm our data, they create the network effect. And now basically they have all this power. And in fact, when you look at where Web 2 is relative to Web 3, there is no question that the design of these companies will always create a digital divide because they own our data. And if you take a look at the top sort of companies in the world, they are all data-rich companies, because in fact, data is the world's most valuable resource at this moment in time, and probably in the future as well. So this valuable resource however, has one interesting component different from, say, oil or cows or whatever natural resources but we used to harvest, which is that it comes from us. So we are in fact the creators of this data. So I think the opportunity to the question of the digital divide is that if we treat data as a property right and its derivative as property rights, which NFTs can provide, then it changes the entire paradigm for everyone who is a contributor to these social networks, for instance, actually now become equity holders. And if you don't become equity holders, then at least because it's a property, you ought to be paid for that.
Absolutely. But Kavita, anyways, I had a follow-up question for you. Now, you have, you operate in the most advanced, I would say, economies like US, and at the same time in evolving economies like India, as far as I would say the blockchain technology is concerned or metaverse is concerned. What is your assessment of Indian progress in this whole journey? Are we behind the curve? Are we just matching the pace? And how much time it will take for us to probably be ahead of the curve?
I think it's a very interesting dichotomy which you just talked about, right? So I will divide this answer into private sector versus government sector. So if I look at the talent, India has one of the best Solidity, Rust, go-to developers in the world. We have proven we are no more a back office anymore for developers. Some of our projects coming out of India, whether we talk about Polygon, whether we talk about 3 exchanges within India, projects like Economy, we have multi-billion dollar projects which are coming out of India and going all over the world, which we have already proven that we are just not providing engineers for American projects or British projects. So we are very much at par when it comes to technology. But where we are really behind is regulation. Where we are really behind is regular people able to participate in this revolution. So we had exchanges and a lot of people started participating with CoinSwitch Kube releasing the number that 42% of their people, if I'm correct, as I remember, are coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities. Right. And that's the power of inclusion in financial market, which we have never seen in this country, right? So, but at the same time, then government for 2 years kept on releasing, it is legal, it's not legal, there's bill gonna happen. There was no clarity for it, right, for 2 years. And finally, they still came up and said, okay, we're definitely gonna take taxes of 30%, the highest bracket in the country, but we still don't know if it's legal or not legal. So we are behind there. But when you talk about technology, you're talking about people coming from tier 2 cities like Yamuna Nagar, places I have not even heard coming from the country, who are becoming one of the most sought after talent across the globe. We recently let my fund, Delta Blockchain Fund, hire one of the best traders for our fund from a tier 2 city in Haryana. So location, background, which colleges are no more a barrier in this space.
Right, correct. So that actually leads to my next question, that are we looking at this actually triggering a sort of a revolution when it comes to financial inclusion for the globe as a whole?
Yes. And I think there's some interesting parallels around this revolution. So, I grew up in Europe, actually in Vienna in the 70s and 80s. And during that time, it was the Cold War, although one could argue a new one is developing. But either way, one of the things that we experienced at the time was that in what was formerly known as the Eastern Bloc countries, there was another kind of disruptive currency that was actually traded everywhere in a kind of black market way, and that was the US dollar. Right? The US dollar was basically used all over basically Eastern Europe. Nobody would accept any of their local currencies because at that point in time, it just didn't have the same value and stability. But everything else was basically being traded in US dollars. And so I think the revolution in question is actually just the solution that is needed for the world from our perspective. Because when you look at the existing financial systems, as much as some people say, well, we want to keep what we have because it works for us. The problem is it doesn't work for them, right? And what is this generation that is coming in? Who are the larger group of people that we have to depend on? Right? And who is in fact our future, right? That's the other thing. So I generally tend to think that, if our future is the youth, which, it generally is, then we have to look towards them as the indicator of where things are going and adapt to that. Because at the end of the day, the world is theirs to make going forward, not ours, right? And that's kind of the conflict that's happening in it as well. because for existing sort of established players, this sector is potentially very, very disruptive, and also and if they don't participate in it, actually very, very, very problematic.
Now, Kavita, I want to understand a fundamental concept from you. If you remember, during the recent budget, even the Indian government announced that at some point they will come out with the digital currency, or let's call it digital rupee. A lot of other countries are also working towards it. Now, how is it any different than the digital wallet systems that most of the Indians are using, and you know how UPI is being used? So, what is the basic difference between that and other forms of digital currencies or crypto? I mean, I understand the underlying, and it's not guaranteed by any central bank, but otherwise, how is it any different than the existing digital wallet ecosystem that we have in India, the digital rupee?
Mihir, I have the same question. I don't think
I thought you would have the answer.
I think the whole blockchain crypto community in India have the same question, because they clearly said that they are not even sure it's going to be on blockchain, it's going to be on ledger or not. They're going to come back how it is used. I feel like they are not really competing with CBDCs or USDC, USDT or something like that. I think they're competing with Bharat Pay and Paytm, because so far, if the government is still figuring out it's legal or not legal, how are they going to have 100 to 100 nodes and decentralized data structure is my question too.
Now, the second part of the conversation, which is about metaverse, and that's obviously very exciting because so many things are happening. Even in India, in bits and pieces, things are happening. But what really is the real power of metaverse? If we look at it from, if we were to do crystal ball gazing, yet what are we looking at maybe 10, 15 years down the line? Because I remember back in 80s and 90s, even internet was perceived as some crazy idea and people had no clue how to deal with it or what to do with it.
So if you look at the way that the initial internet, shall we say, or Web 1, as is commonly said, revolutionized the world, it was essentially, it created parity on knowledge and information access. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people equally were able to create the same value out of the information, but at least they had access to it. And if you consider also what it did broadly, for instance, in information equity, in the basis level, it provided a way for farmers across the world to, for instance, charge fairer prices for their goods, because now they knew what the prices were sold elsewhere, right? And the middleman ended up getting squeezed a little more, rightfully so, because he was very extractive in his approach. This same process is now happening, because of Web 2, where that extraction basically happens through this next kind of middleman, which is our data. So with Web 3, or the metaverse as is often described, or open metaverse as we specifically want to say, because there are distinctions between that, it is now what we describe as the internet of ownership, meaning that now actually, we actually own basically a part of this. And we think the concept, and we think somewhat, and potentially even where, let's call it human salvation can come from, is that instead of thinking in terms of universal basic income, it becomes a kind of universal basic equity. Because we are the creators of our data, therefore we are the creators of our own equity. But similarly to information, we may not necessarily create the same value out of our equity, right? Our data may be less valuable because we're not giving as much experience in it, or we're not as creative, or whatever that may be, but we can still derive value because we're all contributors to the network effect. So, if you asked me to forecast, say, 10, 15 years down the road, what the metaverse will look like, well, hopefully most of us, at least I hope the majority of the world, will now be a participant of this. It means that we have ownership, or ownership at other people's stakes, right? And it also means that from a network effect standpoint, the largest of companies will no longer be the ones that build closed metaverses, where they basically control their sort of own little data kingdoms, but in fact will be the large players that are open and sort of more democratic in their approach.
Right. Kavita, crypto took off in a big way in India. And like you rightly said, even the tier 2 and tier 3 towns participated in a big way. The youngsters participated in a big way. Now NFT, I would say, has just started its journey in India. And, what would be the trajectory, or how do you see it evolving, the NFTs in India? Because not many people actually understand the concept as well.
Mihir, I agree with you. Even today, a lot of times when I'm visiting India and I'm just sitting with friends, the first question I say is like, "Oh, can you just take this picture and then you NFT it and like maybe I'm gonna make some money." Like maybe that's a joke, maybe that's a lack of understanding. So those things still happens, but we also have to understand that anything which is new, right? It takes time for people to understand, to see the value, as Kat was saying. But most importantly, to understand that your data is your own and there is a value associated which you can own and commercialize. But the way I look at it is world of NFT and metaverse and marketplace very like completely coming together. And I think the question which you were asking, yeah, if we connect that together, in next 2 3 years I see a lot of your stand-up comedies, your shows, a lot of those things happening in metaverse across the globe, nothing to do with India or something. The other thing which is actually going to happen at the same time, Meher, which is a lot of customer care operation driven services being provided using metaverse as an animated space for people to do it from home. So think about an old person, right? Let's say my grandfather at 82 doesn't want to go to the bank and sit there for 2 hours just for a simple credit or debit or whatever. He can do it sitting at home using the metaverse without having a physical pain to go through it. I see that happening very, very fast. And then the assets on that, NFTs becoming the world in the gaming world, in the worlds of gallery, being part of it. So I truly believe that in 5 years, starting from now, I think we will be completely, metaverse will become a part of our user experience as we have with cell phones.
Absolutely. Now, since you mentioned gaming, Kavita, in our neighborhood, we have a very weird sort of situation. So there is China, which is trying to control gaming and put controls on how many hours one can play games in a particular week, especially the students. And then there is India, where it is taking off. It's still in nascent stage when it comes to the mainstream entertainment media, but it's taking off. So how do you see the whole gaming industry evolving? Because then I'll go to Yat and ask him the follow-up question, since he predicted that it's going to be $1 trillion sort of an industry. But before that, in Indian context, what is your view on the gaming?
I mean, if you look at the gaming and the betting industry in India, it's already a multi-billion-dollar economy.
Right.
Government has been working from a long time again to figure out regulations around it. We still don't have that, but we have a huge economy. You have amazing games with like 500,000 players on cricket and football. And then there are like really interesting, I remember there was a joke 2 years back when the chopping of the fruits became a big ninja thing everywhere in the household. So we have been having gaming economy and everybody is getting those points. Now the difference is the same game, instead of just getting, you have 5,000 points on your Candy Crush, you have 5,000 rupees on your Candy Crush, which you can take outside the game and actually buy something. You can order on Zomato using that. And I think that's what is enabled by a blockchain industry and the gaming industry in the blockchain.
Interesting. Yet now, would you like to add to that? Because I think Kavita made a very important point that while the general tendency is to resist, because people consider that overexposure to gaming is bad and blah blah blah, it is actually going to become a very fundamental, I would say, component of the social fabric, the family fabric at some point. Your take on that?
So I think if you look at the rest of the world right now, and India included, the gaming industry as a whole, not including blockchain, is $180 billion in size today. There are 3.2 billion out of 4.6 billion people in the world that are connected online, that are playing games. So, if you look at those numbers, you actually have to sort of probably already indicate that gaming culture and sort of as a media is already here today. And in fact, it has been over some time. Gaming is also the only industry that is in the media side that is growing the way that it is. It is larger than film and music combined as an industry. So it's here. And when you think about sort of interactions of culture, actually people already look at their gaming gear, both physical and hardware, as a kind of status. So the relationships that we have already in the gaming world with digital assets and goods are quite similar to that what we have in the physical world. And in fact, if you ask our children, what would they like for Christmas or for their birthday, likely it is something virtual. Right? So that's kind of the state of the world we're in right now. I think there's an interesting commentary for India versus China. China is one of those countries that really advanced in gaming very early on. So when you look at the population of gamers in China, it is roughly double that of India for the time being.
Right.
So the last stats, there's probably like 700 plus million people in China that are playing games, relative to their population. India is about half that, although moving very quickly. So from a developmental standpoint, it is, in terms of population onboarding, is a little behind. So the space and the regulation and the assumptions around this is a little different. But again, this control over what's happening in China is an interesting example. And to a lesser extent, Europe is trying to deal with it in a different way, which is that what is actually happening is that the people who are playing these games are controlled by the entities that own these games, right? Just like the sort of digital data kingdoms I described earlier. And now, how does this become a $1 trillion economy? Well, if you have essentially something that was dead capital, right, where basically you have the time inside games already have economic substance, but it's not able to be monetized. There's no value because it's centralized and controlled. When you open it up, like how you open kingdoms into capitalism and democracy, basically the economic flywheel starts to grow because now things that used to be rental in economics become ownership. And much like rental, you don't expect to buy your house for 2 or 3 times rent, right? You understand that there's a long-term benefit and you start compounding this over 10, 20, or 30 years. And that's what's happening, for instance, in games like Axie Infinity. Axie Infinity is a multi-billion-dollar economy at this point, but its actual space is, maybe less than 12 million users, for instance, of which maybe there's several million that are active. That's a big number. But when you take a look at the gaming space, the sort of, let's call it the centralized rental game economies, in order to achieve these same economics, you need 100 million users.
Absolutely. I think that's very interesting. Kavita, you want to add to that? Any closing comments from you?
I think on that particular one, you had covered it in a detail, but I will take the last thing which he said, which I find, I think the essence of it, which is like your time is yours, your data is yours, and why do you want to spend it for someone else to make money? Your economy is yours, right? And I think we are seeing, and Animoca and I think both Delta Blockchain Fund, we are actively looking at so many amazing projects in India. There are amazing traditional gaming projects which are going on blockchain and creating these revenue streams for the gamers. But there are also a lot of very innovative products coming out from the colleges where students are figuring out how to use this technology and create in-school exclusive gaming experiences. And that has been a big one. So you're going to see a lot of hackathon about play to earn economy gaming in India very soon.
That's very interesting. I think this has been one of the most interesting conversations that we had on Digital India Summit. And Kavita, thank you so much for facilitating this. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us. Thankful to you as well, because what both of you have done is actually clarified the concept and given us a peek into the future. Thank you so much.